All right, guys, good day. Welcome to another tutorial on SQL. My name is Chibikem. Today we are going to be discussing about default constraint in SQL. We're using the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio in this tutorial. If you have not watched my previous videos, you can check back and see the link in the description to go back to my previous video. So today we'll be talking about default constraint. And what is default constraint in SQL? From the definition below, a default constraint is used to set a default value for a column. The default value will be added to all new records if no other value is specified. And going to the next slide, we'll see that we can alter an existing table to add a default constraint. We can add a new table with a default value to an existing table, and we can also drop a constraint. So for better understanding, let's just move right into a SQL Server Management Studio. Now, if in our previous tutorial, we created these two tables, the department table, the depth table, and the TBL underscore employee table under the test database, and I've retrieved all the values with this query above. So for us to better understand what default constraint is, I will explain with the previous table we have created. Now we see from what we have in the two tables we just created, if we drop them down, we'll see that here in the department ID table and in the column the department ID 2, we see that we have um, a constraint here saying not null, which means this table cannot be null. It won't accept a null value. We see the same thing too for the department name, not null. If you come here, you see the primary key in this um, in the column in the TB underscore employee table. In this column, the ID, we see it is also not null. It's specifying not null, which means it cannot accept a null value. Same with the two other columns following. But if you look at the department ID here in this column, we'll notice that it is null, which means this column is nullable. That is to say, it can accept null if nothing is given. So, but what we are trying to do is to avoid putting a null value. Instead of putting a null value, we can put something uh, like 3 or something else to make the data more clean. Uh, Let me give you an example of what I mean. Let's use a query to insert a record in the TBL underscore employee table so that to have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. We'll use a query. Remember, whatever we do can be done both graphically and with a query. So, but in this tutorial, we'll be using a query. In the subsequent tutorial, we'll go dive into querying. But let's just do this for now. To insert a table, we will use the insert statement. Insert into TBL underscore employee ID. The next column there is name. The next column is email. We'll leave the depth ID. Type the values and 11. Name should be Mary Jane. Sorry, have Mary Jane. and an email of m.j@gmail.com. Um, let's copy the email into here. So if I run, notice I didn't give the value for department ID in this query. There is no department ID in this query if you look at the query. But if we run this query now, if I execute, we see that it has been executed. Then I will retrieve the values again. Now notice from the below that it has inserted null in Mary Jane's record. But what we want is, because 3 means um 3 means HSE, or 99 mean operations, or we can change this to unknown. So let's just put a default value here so that when a query comes in without the department ID, it will give it a default value. So for us to do that, we can use the below query here in this slide. Sorry, that's the alter table. We put the table name, add constraint, constraint name, default value, the value we want to put automatically, and then 4. We put the column name. For a better understanding, let's dive right into our SQL Server Management Studio and we'll write the query. The author table, the table name is tbl underscore employee, add constraint. Let's give the constraint a name. Let's give it emp underscore def, standing for default, underscore constraint. Type the default keyword, default, type in 3, 4. The column name is depth underscore id. Let's confirm if our query is correct, and that's correct. So now let's run this query to add the constraint. Before I run this query, we can see from here, from the constraint, that we don't have, if we click on the constraint folder, we'll see that there is no constraint existing in this folder. But let's run this. You see command has been completed. Now if I refresh this constraint folder, we'll see that we have sorry, that should be under here. We'll now see that we have a new constraint, emp underscore def underscore const, which we just created here. So now for us to see that, let's add a new record without putting the department ID. I'm going to change this to 12. Going to change this to glory. Glory April. Let's change this to g.a@gmail.com. And we haven't inserted a department ID, but let's see what happens. We see that the default constraint we just created will automatically insert 3 into the department ID record for glory. Let's run this command. Command completed. Now let's retrieve those values again, and boom, we now see that by default glory April has a default ID of 3 because we had done that in the constraint. So that is how to add a default constraint. The same thing we can do for an To add a constraint when we create a new column, the same command we say alter table, the table name, add constraint, add the column we are putting the data type, whether null or not null, then the constraint name will now say default and then the default value. And this is quite straightforward. We're not going to do this in this tutorial. Next is how we can drop the constraint we just created. This is very straightforward with the key with the statement alter table, the table name, the drop constraint, and the constraint name. Let's see how we can do that in SQL Server Management Studio. The constraint we just created now, let's see. I'll refresh this page to see that we still have the constraint. Now let's drop the constraint. Drop constraint. Sorry, we use the alter statement first. Alter table. The table name is tbl underscore employee. Drop constraint. Let me copy the constraint name here and then let's run the command. Command file. Oh, okay, I think there's a miss. We didn't spell this. Let's drop the constraint now. The constraint has been dropped. If we refresh this, we see that the constraint has been removed. So that is how to delete a default constraint that we created. We'll end this here, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. You can also share this video with your friends, like, and also click the bell icon so that you will get notified when we create a new video. Thank you. I'll see you in the next tutorial.